My name is Michael Turner. I'm 34 years old, and I live in San Francisco, a city that never sleeps because it's too busy chasing the next big thing. Growing up here, you learn early that hard work isn't just admirable, it's survival. The fog rolls in every morning like clockwork, but unlike the weather, the pressure to perform never lifts. To keep listening to this beautiful and special story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Write your name and the city you're watching from so I can include a special shout out for you in an upcoming story. I remember standing at my kitchen window this morning, watching those iconic yellow cable cars crawl up Powell Street, thinking about how I used to ride them as a kid, dreaming of working in those gleaming towers downtown. My father, a postal worker who never missed a day in 30 years, used to tell me that success meant showing up and working harder than everyone else. Michael, he'd say, pointing toward the financial district, those people in those buildings got there because they wanted it more than everyone else. Now, at 34, I had everything I thought I wanted: a corner office on the 23rd floor of a gleaming glass tower, a salary that let me afford a decent one-bedroom apartment in Mission District with exposed brick walls and hardwood floors, and the respect that comes with being indispensable. But success in San Francisco comes with a price tag that's not listed on any lease agreement. It's measured in missed dinners, with friends, canceled weekend plans, and that constant knot in your stomach that whispers, if you slow down, someone hungrier will take your place. The tech scene here moves faster than those cable cars ever could, and I had convinced myself that keeping up meant never stopping. My apartment, which I had been so proud of when I first signed the lease 3 years ago, became a second office. The kitchen table that I'd imagined hosting dinner parties on was perpetually covered with laptops, cables, chargers, and empty coffee cups from Blue Bottle Coffee down the street. The living room couch, where I'd planned to relax and watch Netflix, became a makeshift desk for video calls that ran past midnight. The smell of fresh sourdough from Tartine Bakery would drift up through my windows every morning, mixing with the fog and the distant sound of the Muni buses rumbling down 16th Street. But I rarely had time to go downstairs and buy a loaf, let alone sit in a cafe and enjoy it like a human being. Everything was about efficiency, optimization, performance metrics. I had become a human algorithm, processing tasks and solving problems, but somewhere along the way, I'd stopped living. Chapter 2. The Indispensable Man. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being Michael and became the guy who fixes everything. At Pinnacle Technologies, a mid-sized startup that specialized in data analytics for Fortune 500 companies, that's exactly what I had become. When the servers crashed at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, disrupting client dashboards across 3 time zones, they called me. When a client like Johnson & Associates threatened to pull $1 million contract because our reporting system was missing a crucial feature, they called me. When the new hire couldn't figure out the complex system architecture that I had built from scratch 3 years ago, guess who got the call? The irony wasn't lost on me. I had worked so hard to prove my worth, to make myself valuable, that I had trapped myself in a cage of my own making. My manager, Karen Williams, a sharp woman in her 40s who wore expensive blazers and spoke in corporate buzzwords, would lean against my cubicle wall with that smile that meant trouble. "Hey Michael, I know it's Friday at 6 p.m. and you probably have plans, but could you just take a quick look at this client escalation? It should only take an hour or two." And I always said yes, because saying no felt like admitting weakness, like proving that maybe I wasn't as capable as I pretended to be. Because in a city where 20-something Stanford graduates with trust funds were starting companies in their parents' garages, being 34 and still an employee felt precarious enough, without adding difficult to work with to my reputation. My colleagues started treating me differently after the first year, not with admiration, with relief. Relief that they weren't me. Relief that when something went wrong, it would land on my desk, not there. The office dynamics shifted around me like I was a lightning rod, attracting all the problems, all the blame, all the impossible deadlines that came with serving demanding enterprise clients. I told myself it was job security. In a city where startups die as quickly as they're born, where entire companies can disappear overnight when funding dries up, where founders have falling outs, being irreplaceable felt like the ultimate insurance policy. But insurance policies are just promises that something bad might happen. I should have paid attention to that fine print. The turning point came during our quarterly review last spring. I had single-handedly saved 2 major projects from complete disaster, trained 5 new employees on systems that existed only in my head, and worked through 3 consecutive weekends to deliver a custom solution for our biggest client. My reward? More responsibility, more projects, more pressure. When I finally worked up the courage to ask about a promotion or a substantial raise, Karen smiled that same smile and said, "Let's revisit this next quarter. Right now, we really need you exactly where you are. You're too valuable to move up." The phrase echoed in my head for weeks. Chapter 3. Running on empty. The warning signs were everywhere, but I had trained myself to ignore them, like a driver speeding past red lights. My body became a machine that I refueled with caffeine and powered through with pure willpower and stubborn pride. Sleep became optional, something for people with easier jobs and fewer responsibilities. Meals became interruptions to productivity, obstacles to overcome rather than moments to enjoy. Social life became something other people had, something I would get back to when things calmed down at work. My mom would call from Portland every Sunday evening, and I'd answer while reviewing spreadsheets or responding to urgent emails that weren't really urgent. "You sound tired, honey," she'd say, her voice carrying that concerned tone that mothers perfect over decades of work. "When's the last time you took a real vacation? When's the last time you came home to visit?" And I'd assure her I was fine, just busy with an important project that would wrap up soon. Fine was my default setting, even when my hands shook from too much coffee, even when I couldn't remember the last time I'd watched a movie or read a book for pleasure, even when I realized I'd been wearing the same shirt for 3 days because I'd been sleeping in my office more than my apartment. San Francisco's famous fog started to feel personal, like the city was reflecting my internal state. Some mornings I'd step outside my apartment building and couldn't see more than a block ahead. The whole world felt muffled, gray, It felt like a metaphor for my life. I could only see the immediate task in front of me, never the bigger picture, never the destination I was supposedly working toward. My friends stopped inviting me to things, and I can't blame them. At first, they'd text about weekend trips to Napa Valley, or evening drinks at rooftop bars in Soma, or Sunday brunch in the Castro. But after months of sorry working on a critical deadline responses, the invitations dried up like California during a drought. Sarah, my closest friend from college who worked as a teacher in Oakland, stopped asking if I wanted to grab dinner. Marcus, my former roommate who'd stayed in touch even after he moved to Seattle, stopped sending funny memes and updates about his life. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself I was focused, disciplined, ambitious, all the qualities that successful people were supposed to have. I told myself that sacrifice was temporary, that all this hard work would pay off eventually, that I was building something meaningful. I told myself a lot of lies during those late nights when the office was empty, except for the cleaning crew and the hum of computers that never slept. The breaking point was subtle, like most disasters are. It wasn't one catastrophic event, but a slow erosion of everything that made me human. I stopped noticing the smell of garlic and cumin from the Mexican restaurant next door to my building. I stopped hearing the street musicians who played on Market Street during lunch hour. I stopped seeing the beauty in the city I had loved since childhood. The way the morning light hit the Bay Bridge, the Victorian houses painted in impossible colors, the way the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beyond the Golden Gate. Everything became gray, utilitarian. Life became a series of problems to solve and deadlines to meet. And somewhere in that process, I forgot that I was supposed to be living it. Chapter 4. The Collapse. It happened on a Tuesday in late October, not a Monday which would have been poetic in its tragedy, not a Friday which would have made sense as the culmination of a brutal week, just a random Tuesday when the fog was particularly thick and the office felt smaller than usual, like the walls were slowly closing. I was in the middle of a crisis that wasn't really a crisis, just another fire drill that somehow became my responsibility, because everyone assumed I could handle it. 3 different people were talking at me simultaneously, Karen from my left frantically explaining that the Morrison account was threatening to leave unless we fixed a reporting bug by end of day, a client on speakerphone, their voice crackling through the cheap conference room speakers as they listed everything wrong with our latest deliverable, and a developer messaging me frantically on Slack, asking for clarification on requirements that I had written 6 months ago and barely remembered. My computer screen showed 17 different applications running, each one demanding attention like needy children. Email notifications popped up every few seconds. Slack messages piled up faster than I could read them. My phone buzzed with texts from other colleagues who needed immediate responses to problems that had apparently become my problems by default. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed brighter than usual, casting a harsh glare on everything. The air conditioning was broken again, and the office felt stuffy, recycled, suffocating. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, could feel sweat gathering at my collar despite the chill San Francisco morning outside. And then something inside me just stopped. Not dramatically. Not with a big announcement or a dramatic exit like in the movies. I simply stood up, grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair, and walked out. I didn't say goodbye to Karen, who was still talking about client expectations and urgent deadline. I didn't finish the conference call or respond to the flood of Slack messages. I didn't save my work or update my status to away. I just left. The elevator ride down felt eternal. 23 floors of silence while my brain tried to process what I had just done, what it meant, what would happen next. The lobby was busy with people rushing to meetings, clutching their phones like life preservers, wearing expressions I recognized from my own mirror. I used to be one of them. For a moment, standing in that marble lobby with its pretentious modern art and the sound of expensive shoes clicking on hard surfaces, I couldn't remember why. I walked through downtown San Francisco for hours, past the Salesforce Tower, reaching into the fog like a glass monument to ambition, past the homeless encampments that the city pretends don't exist, where people who've fallen through the cracks try to survive in the shadow of billion-dollar companies, past all the coffee shops and co-working spaces full of people who looked exactly like I used to look, stressed, wired, important, convinced that what they were doing mattered more than their own well-being. I ended up at Crissy Field, staring out at the Golden Gate Bridge, watching seagulls and joggers, and families with children, people who seemed to have figured out how to exist without constantly producing, achieving, performing. The bridge looked different than usual, softer somehow in the fog, less like a symbol of achievement, and more like what it actually was, a way to get from one place to another. Chapter 5. The silence after. The first week was the hardest, not because of guilt or regret. I felt surprisingly little of either, but because of the silence. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't buzzing every 5 minutes. No urgent emails marked with red exclamation points. No crisis meetings scheduled for lunch hours. No one needing me to fix their problems or save their projects or work miracles with impossible deadlines. I called in sick that first day, using a voice that sounded foreign to my own ears. Then I took the rest of the week off using vacation time I'd accumulated but never taken. 2.5 weeks of unused days that represented evenings and weekends I'd given to the company, instead of to myself. My apartment felt foreign, like I was house-sitting for someone else. I had lived there for 3 years but had spent so little time actually being present that I noticed details for the first time. The way afternoon light hit the kitchen table, creating patterns on the wall, the sound of my upstairs neighbor's footsteps, evidence of another human living their life. The fact that I owned books I'd never read, clothes I'd never worn, kitchen equipment I'd never used. Sleep became something I remembered how to do. Real sleep, not the restless few hours between one crisis and the next. Not the shallow unconsciousness punctuated by work anxiety dreams. I slept for 12 hours straight that first night, and woke up feeling like I'd been holding my breath for months, like I'd finally surfaced after nearly drowning. But the silence was deafening in its own way. I had defined myself so completely by my work, by my productivity, by my ability to solve problems and meet impossible deadlines, that without those external measures, I wasn't sure who I was. Strip away the meetings, the deadlines, the constant sense of urgency, and what was left? The question terrified me more than any corporate emergency ever had. I spent days walking through Golden Gate Park, watching people who seemed to have figured out how to exist without constantly producing value for someone else. Families having picnics on blankets, children feeding ducks in the pond, elderly couples walking slowly and holding hands, students reading under trees. Simple human activities that I had forgotten existed, that I had dismissed as luxuries for people with less important jobs. The city looked different when you weren't rushing through it. I noticed things I'd walked past for years. The murals in the Mission District that told stories of community and resistance, the way the light changed throughout the day in different neighborhoods. The fact that San Francisco, more than just startups and tech companies, It was also teachers and artists, and firefighters and small business owners, people who found meaning in ways that had nothing to do with disrupting industries or optimizing profit margin. Chapter 6. The Company Panics. By the second week, my phone started ringing. Karen, at first with carefully professional questions about when I'd be back, delivered in the tone she usually reserved for important clients. Then my teammates asking where I'd saved certain files, how to access systems that existed primarily in my head, what the passwords were for accounts that only I managed. Then clients wondering about project timelines and deliverables that had suddenly become unclear without my constant attention. The tone of these calls shifted from concerned to urgent to desperate as the days passed. Projects that had been running smoothly under my constant supervision began to unravel. Systems that I had maintained through endless hours of troubleshooting began to break down. Clients who had trusted me personally started questioning whether Pinnacle Technologies could deliver without their go-to problem solver. "Michael, we really need you back," Karen said during one particularly frantic call. I was sitting in Dolores Park, watching people play frisbee and walk dogs, and her voice sounded like it was coming from another planet. "The Jenkins project is completely stalled, and the client is threatening to pull out. You're the only one who understands the architecture. You're the only one who knows how all the pieces fit together." It was strange, hearing desperation in her voice. For 3 years I had been desperate to prove myself, desperate to meet impossible deadlines, desperate for recognition that never came in any meaningful way. Now the roles were reversed, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no sense of triumph. Just a kind of hollow amusement at the predictability of it all. They offered to send flowers. They offered a bonus for coming back early. They offered to discuss my concerns and address any issues when I returned. But they never offered the one thing I had needed all along: respect for my humanity. The subtext was always the same: come back because we need you, not because you matter as a person. Come back because the company is more important than your well-being. I watched from my kitchen window as a cable car stopped at the intersection below, tourists climbing aboard with excitement for their San Francisco adventure. They had no idea that the man in the window above was having his own kind of adventure, learning to say no, learning to exist without being needed, learning that his value as a human being wasn't tied to his productivity or his availability or his willingness to sacrifice his health for someone else's profit margins. The desperation in the calls increased. David Chen, the CEO, someone who had never called me directly before, left a voicemail that I listened to 3 times. "Michael, I'm going to be frank with you. We're in trouble. The Morrison account is falling apart, and honestly, you're the only one who can save it. What do you need from us? More money? A promotion? A team? Whatever it takes. We'll make it happen." For 3 years I had been asking for exactly those things: more support, fair compensation, recognition for my contribution. But they had only become available now that I was gone, now that they were facing the consequences of building their entire operation around one person's willingness to work themselves into the ground. Chapter 7. Seeing clearly for the first time. The fog lifted one morning, literally and metaphorically. I could see all the way across the bay to the Berkeley Hills, their green slopes clear and defined in the rare clarity that San Francisco offers when the weather gods align. And for the first time in months, I could also see my life clearly. The pattern was obvious now. I had been so afraid of being rejected, so terrified of being seen as ordinary or replaceable, that I had rejected myself first. I had worked myself into irrelevance while convincing myself I was indispensable. My phone rang again. David, this time calling personally rather than leaving voicemails. "Michael, I'm going to be completely honest with you. We're in serious trouble. The Morrison account is falling apart without your oversight. The Jenkins project is 3 weeks behind schedule. 2 other clients are asking questions about continuity. What do you need from us? Because whatever it is, we'll make it happen." What did I need from them? The question hung in the air like the fog outside my window, heavy and impenetrable. For years I had needed their approval, their recognition, their impossible standards met with grace and competence. But sitting in my quiet apartment, watching real life happen on the street below, people walking dogs, buying groceries, Talking to neighbors, I realized I needed something else entirely. I need you to hire more people. I heard myself saying, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I need you to document processes instead of keeping them in one person's head. I need you to respect work-life balance instead of just talking about it in company meetings. And I need you to value people before profits, to understand that your employees are human beings, not just resources to be optimized. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. They didn't want to fix the system. They just wanted me to keep breaking myself to make it work. They wanted the convenience of having someone who would sacrifice their health and happiness to cover for poor planning and understaffing. They wanted the old Michael back, the one who said yes to everything, who absorbed all the stress so they didn't have to address the fundamental problems with how they ran their business. That's a big conversation, Michael. Can you come in tomorrow so we can discuss this properly? Maybe we start with a significant raise and some additional vacation time. I looked out my window at the cable car tracks, at the city I had lived in my entire life, at the people going about their lives without constantly being needed by someone else. I don't think so, Dave. I think you need to figure out how to run your company without depending on one person's willingness to work themselves to death. Chapter 8. Learning to say no. Saying no was like learning a new language. For years, my vocabulary had consisted of yes, absolutely, no problem, and I'll make it work. The word no felt foreign on my tongue, like I was speaking with an accent I'd never had before. But each time I used it, it got a little easier, a little more natural. No, I wouldn't come in on Saturday to fix someone else's mistake. No, I wouldn't take a call during my lunch break to troubleshoot a problem that had existed for weeks but had suddenly become urgent. No, I wouldn't sacrifice my mental health for a project that could wait until Monday, despite what the artificial deadlines suggested. Each no was a small act of rebellion against the culture that had nearly consumed me, against the idea that being available meant being valuable, that saying yes to everything was the same as being a good employee. My colleagues' reactions ranged from confusion to resentment. I was breaking an unspoken contract, the one where I absorbed all the stress and dysfunction so they didn't have to, where I worked evenings and weekends so they could maintain reasonable boundaries. But for the first time in years, I felt like myself, not the corporate version of Michael Turner who lived for other people's approval, not the always available problem solver who defined his worth by how many fires he could put out. Just me, a human being with interests and needs and limitations, someone who deserved to exist outside of his productivity. I started therapy during this time. Alina Martinez, a soft-spoken woman with an office in the Castro district, helped me understand that my work addiction wasn't strength or dedication, it was fear. Fear of being ordinary, fear of being disposable, fear of discovering that maybe I wasn't as special as I needed to believe to justify all the sacrifice. What would happen if you weren't indispensable? She asked during one session, her voice gentle but direct. I get people would manage without me. I admitted, the words feeling like a confession. And what would that mean about you as a person? The question hit like a punch to the gut. If I wasn't indispensable at work, was I worthless everywhere else? Had I confused being needed with being valued? Had I built my entire identity around being the person who fixed everyone else's problems because I was afraid to face my own? The sessions were difficult, forcing me to confront questions I had avoided for years. But they were also liberating, helping me understand that my value as a human being wasn't tied to my job performance, that I could be worthy of love and respect even if I wasn't solving everyone's problems all the time. Chapter 9. Building something new. Recovery wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong, confident in my new boundaries, proud of the progress I was making toward a healthier relationship with work and with myself. Other days, the old anxiety crept back like fog rolling in from the Pacific, whispering that I was making a huge mistake, that I'd never find another job, that I was destroying my career for nothing. But slowly, something else began to grow in the space that work anxiety used to occupy. Curiosity, interest in things that had nothing to do with productivity or performance metrics, or client satisfaction scores. I started cooking again, really cooking, not just reheating takeout between meetings or eating energy bars at my desk. I discovered that I actually enjoyed the process of preparing food, the meditative rhythm of chopping vegetables, the way flavors combine to create something new. I started reading fiction again, books that had nothing to do with professional development or industry trends. I rediscovered the pleasure of getting lost in a story, of caring about characters who existed only on the page, of experiencing emotions that weren't related to work stress or deadline pressure. Most importantly, I started noticing people again. There was Maria, the barista at my local coffee shop on Valencia Street, who remembered that I liked oat milk lattes and always asked about my day with genuine interest, not just professional politeness. There was Frank, my neighbor in the apartment below, who worked as a carpenter and seemed genuinely content with his life, never talking about disrupting industries or scaling operations, just about the satisfaction of building things with his hands. There was my mom, who called every Sunday and deserved better than half my attention, while I multitasked through spreadsheets and email. I started actually listening to her stories about the garden she was planting, about the book club she had joined, about the small joys and concerns that made up a normal human life. I began to see that San Francisco, my city, existed beyond the startup scene that had consumed my vision for so long. There were artists in the Mission District creating murals and music for the pure joy of creation. There were teachers in the Sunset working with children who needed patience and care more than efficiency. There were firefighters and nurses and librarians doing work that actually mattered, that made people's lives better without needing to disrupt entire industries to justify their existence. The city I thought I knew revealed itself to be larger, more diverse, more human than the narrow slice I had experienced from my office window. And for the first time in years I felt like I could be part of that larger humanity, instead of just a cog in someone else's machine. Chapter 10: The Choice to Live. 6 months later I got a job offer. Not from Pinnacle Technologies. They had eventually hired 3 people to replace me, which told me everything I needed to know about my old workload and their previous expectations. This offer came from a smaller company in Oakland across the bay, one that explicitly mentioned work-life balance in their job posting, and seemed to actually mean it. The salary was lower than what I had been making. The prestige was negligible. They weren't disrupting anything, just providing honest services to local businesses. The office was in a converted warehouse in a mixed-use neighborhood, instead of a gleaming tower downtown. But during the interview, when I mentioned that I wouldn't be available for non-emergency work after 6 p.m., and that I wouldn't be checking email on weekends, the hiring manager nodded and said, "Good. People who don't have lives outside work aren't as creative anyway. We've found that employees with boundaries actually do better work." I accepted the job, but more importantly, I accepted myself. The Michael Turner who had needed external validation, who had confused being busy with being important, had been replaced by someone more modest but infinitely more sustainable. Someone who could appreciate a foggy San Francisco morning without immediately checking his phone for urgent messages. Someone who could have dinner with friends without thinking about tomorrow's deadlines. Someone who could be present in his own life. The work itself was satisfying in a way that surprised me. Without the constant pressure to be indispensable, I could focus on doing good work instead of heroic work. Without the artificial urgency of constant crises, I could think strategically instead of just reactively. Without the fear of being replaced, I could collaborate genuinely instead of hoarding knowledge to protect my position. The other day, I ran into Karen at a coffee shop in Mission District. She looked exactly how I used to look. Tired, caffeinated, important, checking her phone every few seconds like she was monitoring a patient in intensive care. She asked if I missed the old job, the old intensity, the feeling of being at the center of everything important. "Do you miss being stressed all the time?" I asked her. She laughed. But it was the kind of laugh that meant she wasn't really laughing, the kind that meant she was too tired to find anything genuinely funny anymore. I don't think about Pinnacle Technologies anymore, except when stories like this one force me to remember. They survived my departure, just like I survived my breakdown. The difference is that I chose to learn from it, to use the experience to build something better instead of just something more intense. These days, I take the cable car to work sometimes, just because I can, just because it's slower and more human than the BART train, but gets me there just the same. I watch the tourists taking pictures and remember what it felt like to see my city with fresh eyes, to experience wonder instead of just ambition. San Francisco is still a place that demands everything from you, that whispers constantly about the next opportunity, the next level, the next achievement that will finally make you feel successful enough. But I've learned that you don't have to give it everything. You can choose to be human instead of a human resource. You can choose to live instead of just survive. You can choose to be enough exactly as you are, without constantly proving your worth through sacrifice and exhaustion. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you can choose yourself before you choose to please everyone else. You can choose presence over productivity, boundaries over burnout, being over doing. That choice, more than any promotion or raise or recognition, saved my life.